Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you so much for coming to the Food Tank and Hunter College New York City Food Policy Center's first joint live stream event. My name is Charles Plotkin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hunter College New York City Food Policy Center. And I'm joined with my friend and colleague, the co-founder of Food Tank, Danny Nuremberg. These continue to be very strange and difficult times, and I'm glad that many of you are able to make time for this important discussion, the impact of COVID-19 on restaurants. We're very fortunate to have several experts and practitioners join today for a three-part discussion. Each panel will be 30 minutes and will be continuous without any breaks. Our first panel is what is the role of restaurants in the food system? The second panel is the pivot, working through COVID-19. And the third and final panel is what's next for restaurants post-COVID. Thank you, and let's get right into our first panel. What is the role of restaurants in the food system? We have joining us today Camilla, a founding member of the Independent Restaurant Coalition and the co-founder of Relief Opportunities for All Restaurants. Camilla, thank you so much for coming today. And I just would like to start with a brief introduction, from you, and tell us a little bit about your background and so forth.
Oh, sure. Well, I have a pretty wild background. I have a background in business law as well as cooking, went to culinary school in New York City at ICC, worked for both Colicchio as well as Danny Meyer before starting my own restaurant almost 3 years ago that we unfortunately had to close in September due to COVID. It was on Sullivan Street called Westbourne. We were the first zero waste restaurant in Manhattan, certified by True, which is the organization that does LEED certification as well. And in the wake of COVID, for the first time, I guess, became formally an advocate and have learned a lot about lobbying and our government and getting policy done for the first time. March obviously has hit our industry harder than most, and as the second largest employer in the country, we have so many people that are at risk and have been at risk since March, and fighting for them and hopefully to save an industry that's integral to our communities. So we founded the IRC and ROAR almost in the same week, the week of the shutdown in New York.
How is the attention and traction to the association then, and in terms of traction and impact?
In some good ways, a lot, and in some not so good ways, not enough. I think, in such a short time, it's wonderful to hear our lobbyists say that they've never seen people activate so quickly, so succinctly, so collaboratively, and so passionately, and be able to rally, really the country behind us. I mean, you can see, an outpouring of support. I mean, we've raised almost about $2 million for employee relief along with Robin Hood at ROAR just in New York. In the IRC, we've been able to create the Restaurants Act, which was passed in the House, installed in the Senate. To do that in a matter of months, which normally takes, years, is tremendous. But the people we really need the attention from, the federal government, the state government, and the local government, to really come up with a restructuring plan for an industry that's been hit so hard and affects so many people, up and down our supply chain. We're not getting nearly enough attention from those that actually could make the difference between, the industry imploding and not.
I'm wondering, Camilla, if this is such an important industry, which it is, it's the second largest employer in the country, as you said, why aren't policymakers paying attention? This seems like a no-brainer to me in so many ways.
Yeah, I think to understand the lack of action, you also have to understand the history. I always say we are a collection of small businesses, but collectively we're not a small business. But we've been lumped in with small businesses pretty much for as long as I can remember, certainly until, March. And there's always been a perspective of, oh, it's just a bunch of small business owners, it's disaggregated, they're in that bucket, without really realizing that collectively as an industry, we are such a huge part of the economy. We're a huge part of the vibrancy and safety and attraction of, towns and cities alike. I just don't think people ever really read the numbers either. When we were talking about employment statistics and how much we contribute to GDP and what a driver we are of the base level economy, I don't think anyone really realized. I have to say, I think most restaurateurs were surprised. I think most chefs were surprised to see those numbers. So I don't think the scale and scope has ever been something that people thought about. And I also think people didn't realize, 2/3 of restaurants are independently owned. They're not chains. And the only entities that have ever really gotten much attention, particularly at the federal level, are chains and public companies that right now, are much differently situated. And so I think there was also this attitude of how do we ever do it? There's so many of them. It's not like the airlines where there's, single digit players. But when you think about scale, we employ more people in restaurants in New York. And again, that's not even supply chain, just employment. More people in New York than airlines do nationwide. And remember, airlines also were never shut down. We were. And people also have to remember that it's illegal for us to work from home. It's actually illegal to work from home when you work in a food business. So I think it's just that the numbers weren't well known. And I think the dynamics really weren't seen. I keep saying we're sort of the sleeping giant. And, the question is now what, right? You kind of can't ignore, this huge part of the economy. And I think also the economy's changed so quickly, especially over the last decade. And I think with the rise of so much technology, I think we also have to realize as a nation, if we don't preserve this industry, who's providing these jobs? I mean, when was the last time, I ask lawmakers every day, when was the last time you hired someone who didn't go to college? When was the last time you hired someone who needed a second chance? It's very few industries at this scale and scope that, still have, still have open roads and a real zero barrier to entry level job that has long-term career prospects. That kind of social mobility doesn't exist, I would argue, almost anywhere else in our economy.
I think that's 100% correct. And it also, you answered a lot of this, but the idea, just to put a label on it, is that, where does a restaurant fit into the food system? And I ask that because it comes up so frequently in my world, in the food policy world. And I've owned 3 restaurants, and I never thought of when I owned them that I was actually part of the food system that everybody in food policy talks about. So why, when you said that it's just, it can be viewed as disconnected, but why is it overlooked, and why isn't it talked about as part of the food system? And we saw also when supply chains were interrupted because restaurants weren't taking food, how disruptive it actually was. So I'll leave that to you.
I think to your first question, look, I think we're central. I think we are the conduit between how food is grown and distributed and, our consuming public, right? I mean, you learn about new vegetable, what you think are new vegetables, you learn about seafood sustainability. I mean, think about that. So many of these conversations around food as it relates to climate change didn't really get popular and commonplace until a couple of years ago. I almost look at it as, an hourglass. We're really the centerpiece. I mean, that's where most of the public learns how to eat, what's possible, how things are grown, how it affects them. Chefs are really those frontline communicators and those frontline translators, I would say, right? Because when was the last time an average human, an average American, met a farmer? I mean, even in wine, I don't know many friends, we know all our winemakers that we used to distribute, and I'm still very close friends with them. I don't know many friends who ever even thought to give a vineyard a call, and go meet the winemaker and see the person who puts that food or that glass, on their table. As far as why we've been, I think overlooked, like I said, I think the industry has also changed. I think, again, the scope and scale has been misunderstood and I don't think really known. I think second, it's harder to manage a lot of different types of owners. And I think it's much easier to put your hands up and say, oh, well, they don't agree, which is the irony. I actually think we fundamentally as an industry agree on quite a lot, and much more so than people realize. I also think we're seen as more competitive than we are. We're actually a very collaborative, very connected community. And I think that's what the IRC proved, is that we're, again, our lobbyists are constantly, I think, very impressed with us. Everyone's really sort of one phone call away. And whether you really know one another or not, there is a very deep sense of community and family. And, everyone's kind of worked with everyone else in some way. There's like sort of families, I would say. And, especially when we need one another, and you're seeing in the crisis how much restaurants have helped one another, whether it's supporting, teams or providing space or sharing contacts. I mean, we're much more collaborative than we are competitive. And I think lastly, this industry is professionalized in a very interesting way. I think at least over the last decade, I think we've very quickly moved towards much more of a European model. It's really a long-term career. I mean, when I graduated college, my college guidance counselor, fell over in her chair when I wanted to go to culinary school. And now my college has a food magazine. They have a hospitality major and all these things that, I kind of laugh. I didn't graduate that long ago. And it feels like, a different world. So I think that the industry is seen as less sort of temporary transient. I mean, these are careers. And I do think government is old school. And I think they take time to catch up, unfortunately, too long. And I honestly don't think they see us that way. I don't think they see us. I remember at the start of the shutdown, I was on a big call with 800 real estate owners across the country, hosted by a friend of mine. And, he said, well, my business and your project. And I had to stop him. And I said, I'm sorry, I probably employ more people than you do. And, you run what the government would consider a more legitimate enterprise, but I actually have more employees than you. So I wouldn't quite call it a project. And, but I think that is how we're seen, unfortunately. Hi, Naama.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Naama
Very
Tamir,
envious of your beautiful background, Naama.
Naama Tamir, the co-owner of Lighthouse and Lighthouse Outpost, has just joined. Thank you for coming and joining, Naama, and welcome. And we were just in the midst of a discussion on the food system and how restaurants fit in. And I guess my next question was about Mayor de Blasio of New York City and how he alluded to the fact that that restaurants really weren't something, and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm sure I'm going to get emailed about this, but that the gist of it was that restaurants were for the wealthy, okay, and that wasn't the primary concern. And again, I'm paraphrasing. I apologize for that. My memory is not as, and I'm not looking at any screen or notes or anything. So, what would you say to that? Either of our guests or Danny. To that comment that the mayor made, and I'm sure a lot of people share that sentiment.
I think maybe some restaurants do, but luckily for myself and for a lot of my industry partners, we are community centers. We're definitely not for the rich. We are for the neighborhoods. We are for the farmers. We are for each other. Lighthouse, Westbourne. I mean, there's so many neighborhood spots where people just gather to meet people, to talk. That's where they go on dates. It's, there's definitely different kinds of places, and some places in certain neighborhoods that appeal to a different clientele that, other people wouldn't be able to afford. But I wouldn't say that's the majority of restaurants in New York. I think there's something for everyone, and that's really why it's so important that we're there. We in the lack of, especially in New York, that is such a secluded place, and we are all gathering from other places. Restaurants are where people find their grounds, and where they come to when they have a good day or when they have a bad day. They come to celebrate. They come on the days of the elections. I mean, I feel it daily at Lighthouse that this is really the place for people to process their day, especially in these rough times, even through quarantine, when people come to pick up their food to go. What they wanted was that little bit of interaction. What they wanted was to know how we were doing. There's such a sense of a community. People with a lot of money, I think for the most part, left. They have houses in other areas where there's a little bit more nature and a little bit more space, and they didn't need to be here. And I think restaurants and the communities that I saw around me were very much here for each other. So I disagree with that statement entirely.
And I would also add that, what I saw very sharply in March, which I still think has a way to go to unwind, is the government focus was always on guests. And it still remains that way. And I, again, think, you sort of asked why. We're very good at putting on a performance, right? That is our job. We are on stage, and we keep the back of house and the real inner workings and the operations quite quite invisible to a large extent, and sometimes not to our credit and not to our help. And I do think that the focus in New York City and New York, and I would argue nationwide, has really been about guests. And so at the start, it was pretty stark, to hear lawmakers say, oh, well, we're cleaning the subway once in the morning. And I said, well, have you taken the subway? Have any of your staffers taken the subway? How do you tell 30 people that they're supposed to come in for a shift on a subway that our own government doesn't feel is safe? So, despite the rhetoric. So I think regardless of whether someone thinks that restaurants are for the community or for the 1%, as Naama said, I agree. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that she's right. They're community centers. But even taking that away and say you're only talking about high-end restaurants, it's more about the people who work there. This is not about diners. This is about jobs. And I think that what Mayor de Blasio unfortunately was missing in that comment was, one, empathy for all of these people that are unemployed. 1 out of 4 people unemployed at these drastic numbers come from our industry. And we have not received one level of industry-specific relief or aid or restructuring plan. So I think to say that in the face of such devastation was highly insensitive.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think what you said before, Camilla, about chefs being translators, your job now, I feel, is like to translate the plight of those workers. And, groups like, Restaurant Opportunity Center United and One Fair Wage and many others are working alongside you, I think, to build those connections around, the tribulations that so many restaurant workers are facing right now because they're out of work and they don't always, aren't available to get, benefits, unemployment benefits, that kind of thing. How can you both, sort of push that forward, this idea that, without these workers, we can't rebuild the restaurant industry? Naama, I don't know if you want to take that first.
Sure. I mean, I think the idea of like having a neighborhood without restaurants is something none of us want to see, and beyond just the employment of these people, their families, and it starts with our employees, the cooks and the porters and whatnot, but it also goes back to the distribution system, and it trickles down to so many other things that are beyond just the restaurants. We often talk about sustainability, we talk about the environment, but to create a sustainable system means that we're all supporting each other. So be it the farmers, be it the cleaning supply companies, just it's really so much bigger than the one restaurant, that we have to figure out how to save this industry. And again, I really think that it's a major part of the healthiness of our societies. I feel like even in just our neighborhood, on an entirely different topic, but having restaurant closer early, having less people on the street, crime has gone up because there's just less eyes watching, right? So beyond the anxiety and the pandemic and all these other factors, it's just restaurants are helping kind of keep the environment clean and going and happy and with a little bit more eyes and safety around. A couple of years ago, we had an initiative in Williamsburg and in Brooklyn in general called Smart City, and it was all about just making sure that diners were walking home together, because there was a little bit of like more crime and people walking home kind of getting attacked, and so that the restaurants are these just so much more than what it seems. I'm going to mute myself just because of this trend.
Well, I'll jump in and add one quick thing to Naama, which is, and I'm going to steal your name, Naama. We always say at our restaurant, we're lighthouses, and we have to be lighthouses for one another. We have to be lighthouses for our partners and suppliers, and we need to be lighthouses for our guests and the community alike. We have always lived to take care of others, and I think the issue right now is who's taking care of us. You asked about what the government needs to know about us. Overregulation and overtaxation and rising commodity prices has led to a decimation of our business. How, when the industry, profitability has declined in the last decade, as I said, as employment has risen, has popularity and stability, and our industry really flourishing into such a big part of the economy and a serious career. In the same token, the government has caused a huge compression. Profitability across the industry has decreased from 20% to 5% as industry standard. When you are down to that low single digit profitability across the board, doesn't matter how good or bad you are at what you do, there's no room to make improvements. There's no room to change all of those things that you mentioned. And I think that's also what we're calling for, especially at ROAR, is we want a restructuring. We want to work collaboratively with the government so that we can set larger reforms in motion that, frankly, our industry's been wanting for a long time, both on the worker and on the owner side. We have the same interest to make this, as Naama said, a sustainable, healthy business for our community, for us as owners, but most importantly for our teams. And we can't do that on razor thin margins and coming out of essentially what's right now, a devastation, bankruptcy across the board. So it's high time that the government, I think, get into the boat and help us.
Camilla, I want to follow up with a question. I was talking to Chef Asma Khan in London this morning, and she was talking about, how her restaurants are very women focused. They're focused on, these are women who are self-taught cooks. And, so much progress, I think, has been made, not enough, but before COVID on, sexual harassment in the workplace, how women chefs are treated, how women staff are treated. Do you think post-COVID for both of you that we're going to lose that sort of momentum that we made on women chefs and women in the workplace in restaurants? Or will we come out of this sort of stronger because we've unveiled so much of what was sort of behind the kitchen door as many of us don't know what happens in restaurants?
I hope not. I'm always a forever optimist, and I like to see tomorrow as sunnier than today. I think, the biggest thing we need to focus on is access, opportunity, training, support, and education. And we need more women like Naama who own their businesses, who are in decision-making power, who are in charge of their kitchens. I always said the last decade and a little before was sort of the rise of the female chef and that sort of cult status. And I think the public and the media rallying around, hey, we need more women, in these big, big public positions. And I always say that I think the second wave of that is empowering more women to own their businesses, to really be the financial decision maker. And when you're much more in the driver's seat, obviously, of those types of policies, what your operations like, how your team's treated, what benefits you provide, right? The person who controls the wallet in the business obviously gets to make those decisions. And I think, I think we have seen a rise. I loved our little nook in Soho, and Naama being part of it with her location in Nolita. There were a ton of female restaurateurs, King, Niche, all in our little pocket. And we would always laugh that it was sort of like a women ownership incubator. More of that. And I think that, what we saw even with PPP was a huge failure, right? Only 8% went to hospitality. Women and minority owned businesses, didn't have equal access to capital, which should have been fair across the board. And I think that shines a light on us as a society. And as, again, like I said, I think the government thinking about those opportunities. But I personally am hopeful that women will continue to rise in leadership and in ownership in our industry and continue to balance it out.
I think with the pandemic and the political uproar and the social changes that have happened, I think people have been paying a lot more attention to what's behind the scene. I think that more than ever, they really have been thinking about voting with their dollars. And I think there has been an incredible shift where it's really more about supporting businesses rather than just going out for your own benefit. I think diners see them going to the places they love as a way to support them. And the only thing is we really have to keep this momentum going. I think that we've been in these points before, but it really is on all of us to remind, when things eventually go back to something that resembles some normalcy, to remember to keep those values, and to really think about every time you're going out, is it a place that is supporting their staff, their sustainable goals? Are they a minority? Is it something that you want to see in the world? And then by you going out for dinner there, that is your way to make sure that they're there the year and next. And I really feel like, it was just this wonderful, or rather terrible, set of circumstances, but I felt like there has been a major shift in the culture of consuming, where people are talking about buying less from big corporations and supporting local. And it really is just, do we have the right set of tools to keep this momentum going, to remind people that this is really how we should be consuming all the time, whether it's women, whether it's minorities, whether it's the good players in all of the industry. But like Camilla, I'm also an optimistic. I feel very hopeful that we can turn this moment around and keep the conversation going, and really have a shift in the culture.
Good.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank, did you want to say something, Annie? Sorry.
No, I just thought that was an excellent way to end.
That was a great way to end. And I want to thank Naama and Camilla for coming today. And we have our next panel coming up. And I know it went by so fast, but thank you so much. And thanks for joining us this morning. We all really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Our next panel is the Pivot, working through COVID-19. And we have with us JJ Johnson, good morning, Chef, and Tom Colicchio, good morning. And we would love if you could just sort of do a brief little intro. We can start with you, Tom, if you don't mind. You're on mute.
Hi. Tom Colicchio. I am the chef and owner of Crafted Hospitality, executive producer of Top Chef, and
JJ Johnson, chef and founder of Field Trip in Harlem. Well, more than Harlem now. I keep saying that, but Long Island City, Rockefeller Center to come. And cookbook author and TV talent.
Great, wonderful. Good morning. And we're going to, Tom, sorry.
Don't leave that out. All around awesome guy.
So we're going to jump right in. Sorry, it's a little hard to hear you, Tom.
I have an earbud in. It should be fine.
Okay.
I can hear you pretty well. Hold on 1 second. Let me try something.
I thought it was my earbuds, so I took mine out. So
yeah, that sounds better.
Is that any better?
It's a little low.
Let me. Is that okay?
Yes.
We'll make do with that. That's fine.
Pardon?
Okay, great. So let me just jump right into the first question. So Manhattan was hit particularly hard, and it's just a miracle that restaurants are even surviving. The lack of people, tourists, workers, and I know margins are tight in the restaurant business. How are restaurants getting by? What kinds of innovation are they thinking of and doing? And what seems to be working and what isn't working?
well, I can start. For me, as a first business, like true business owner during the pandemic, I kind of refused to close my doors. I felt like I would be letting down my children, my wife, my family, all the backbone of that helped me get there. And during the pandemic, it started off with my wife just coming home and stating that her hospital was getting hit hard. She's a nurse, and she didn't eat anything that night. And did I bring anything home from Field Trip, or did I cook anything? It was about 1:30 in the morning. And that's where it started for me, for the first pivot. And I started feeding frontline workers right in our local community in Harlem, Upper Manhattan, in the Bronx. And I would say that was the first pivot or the first survival moment of Field Trip. And I worked harder than I did as a young cook, opening, closing, sweeping, mopping, like really in the business, not working on the business. And then from there, I think it broke down this wall during the pandemic inside the Harlem community. People got to really know who we were. And I'm not talking about like new people moving into Harlem or like the upper tier of Harlem Nights. I'm talking about real working class New Yorkers that lived in Harlem. They started to come inside of Field Trip, not saying that I walk by this place every day. I see that Popeyes around the corner closed at 1 o'clock and I'm hungry and I'm going to come in here and try you guys out. And that's how we started to break down or gain this new customer, because our old customer was gone. Our school teachers were gone. Our construction workers were gone. MTA workers. We didn't have any of those customers around. And we started to get this new customer, which actually became a huge chunk of who we are. And that Harlem community kind of lifted us up, and thank God for them. So that's how we're surviving, like really punching in on the community. And I think as a 1%er eater, I think we forget about our community restaurants. And a lot of community restaurants are doing okay because they are that neighborhood place. They are there for a specific reason. And that's what we're tapping into.
And, you talk about that, and one of the things that comes up with supermarkets is this concept of social capital, right? And the idea that restaurants, and we touched upon in the last panel slightly, but expanding upon that. So the idea that, a restaurant is more than just a business in a community. It serves as a central place where people can meet. And whether I go to a restaurant or not in my community, if it closes, it has an impact. I live around a coffee shop in New York City. When it closed, I really mourned. I mean, significantly. It was like the loss of a friend, of a community member, of an environment, and that defined my community. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
I think right now, and I know Tom will get into this as well, is that how restaurants are a necessity more than a luxury. And I think more, and even in New York City, as restaurants close, streets get quieter and quieter. You don't realize that the overnight porter keeps your block safe, right? That the garbage company that comes by and picks up the trash rattles the people out of the street. There's a lot that restaurants do, and I think that COVID has really exposed that. I don't know, I want to say in the best ways, but in a certain type of way for people to understand a little bit more.
Yeah,
Absolutely. That's such a great point. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
I absolutely agree with JJ. I mean, restaurants, we keep the lights on, we keep those corner stores open. There's less crime in areas where there are restaurants where there are lights on. Absolutely, without a doubt. And I agree with everything JJ is saying. The other thing that we can't forget is that independent restaurants across this country employ 11 million people. And so we're talking about major loss of jobs right now. The estimates are, without government help, we're looking at between 65 to 80% of all independent restaurants closing. If you factor in fishermen and farmers and cheesemakers and plumbers who service our restaurant, electricians who service our restaurant, we're talking probably in excess of 20 million people. And so, you can pivot all you want. And JJ, I thought, in a strange way, opening a business door in this time, it gives you the ability to actually write your ticket. It's tough as hell, and I'm not downplaying what he did, because it's hard as hell. And I applaud anyone who decided to open a business through this. But as he said, that's all you can do is hang on. But restaurants that are established, I do takeout now. I'm doing butchered stuff that you can buy. It's not moving the needle. People don't think of me as a takeout place. I can do all the Instagram posts and social media I want, Plus also throughout the summer when we reopened, my customers were gone, and a lot of them still are. They're not in Manhattan. My Long Island restaurants actually doing okay. But the best we're doing, I'm doing about 20-25% of the business that I used to do.
Wow.
Luckily for me, I was able to work things out with my landlords, but still, the best I could do is hang on to break even and lose money. Also, keep in mind, this is the fourth quarter. This is where restaurants make money. We make some money the first quarter, lose money the second and third quarters, especially the third quarter in the summer. And this is when we make all our money. This is when we're seeing the bigger parties. If you have private dining rooms, they're full to the brim right now. The fourth quarter is decimated. It's gone. And so, I don't see a way through this without the Restaurants Act passing. For those that don't know what that is, the Independent Restaurant Coalition focused on the last 8 months of getting a bill written. We have our bill written, both, that's my dog hitting my we have our bill that was written in the House and the Senate. We have 8 co-sponsors now in the House, 49 co-sponsors in the Senate. We have bipartisan support. It's part of the HEROES Act, but I guarantee if Mitch McConnell brought this bill to the floor, it would pass easily. I mean, when you have a Senate bill that has co-signers by John Cornyn of Texas, a conservative, and Elizabeth Warren, a liberal, both co-signing that bill, this will pass. This will infuse $120 billion of liquidity into independent restaurants. And that's the lifeline that we all need to get through this. And JJ, for restaurants like yours that have opened up, there's actually a fix for you as well, because you can look forward to what you're expecting in revenue as opposed to looking back the way the bill is set up now. The other great thing about the bill, for the first 14 days, you have to apply. For the first 14 days, the application's only open for minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and businesses doing less than $1.5 million. So all the small guys and minorities that were left out of the PPP program, you're first in line, and that's the way we wrote this bill. And so this is what's going to get us through. This is how I've been spending my last 8 months, plus opening the restaurants and trying the best we can. And the only reason right now that I'm staying open is because I have workers who need a paycheck. Back when unemployment was $500 a week, they were actually doing okay. They weren't going out. They were actually banking some money, and that was great. But without that right now, I have to keep my doors open and potentially expose my workers to risks of getting COVID because they need a paycheck. And so we shouldn't have to choose between a paycheck and actually keeping our family safe. And yet that's what we have to do.
Absolutely. I mean, Tom, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for all the work that you've done. You've been an incredible force. I heard you on CNN a few days ago. You've been driving this home to policymakers for the last 8 months in such a huge way. Thank you for that. And I know a lot of folks are thanking you for that.
I'll accept on behalf of the 150 or so, probably more chefs that every single day we're on Zooms, and every single day they are making phone calls and calling their senators, members of Congress relentlessly to get them signed up. And so it's I may be the face of this, but there's so many chefs and restaurateurs that are just really just doing an amazing job of just being focused on this one singular issue, as well as opening their businesses and taking care of their staffs and their families. Sure.
Well, on that point, what can we as eaters do to help, get this act passed, to get, more force behind it?
If every single person who's on this call today, picks up the phone, calls their member of Congress, you can go to saverestaurants.org. That's the Independent Restaurant Coalition site. You can, there's a port where you can actually put in your zip code. It'll bring you directly to your member of Congress. You can make that phone call. You can send that email, and be relentless. You just keep working until you get someone's attention. Again, we have 59 co-sponsors in the Senate side, including people who are typically leaders, who are heading up some of these committees. They don't co-sign bills. A lot of them have. So we can use more. If you have a connection to any senator, House member, give them a call.
Absolutely. This should not be a partisan issue. It should be bipartisan. We need support from every side, Republican, Democrat, and everything in between.
Exactly. Roger Wicker, who is a conservative Republican from Mississippi, wrote the bill in the Senate.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Tom, you've been through struggles in the restaurant industry before, the 2008 financial crisis. Do you see similarities, and what could you have learned, that you can share with us now from that time?
Yeah, what I'm looking at now is going back to 2008. 2013 was our best year, so it took 5 years, and I'm expecting that to be the same cycle here. It's going to take 5 years. After 2013, when we started seeing the economy really started to take off, and we saw a lot of restaurants opening up, and the competition, especially in New York, got really difficult. And I suspect the same thing is going to happen because a lot of the restaurants that are closing, they're leaving behind fully built restaurants, and commercial real estate is going to crash if these restaurants and small businesses close. So I think there may be opportunities on the back end, but it's going to take a long time for people to start actually spending capital after the pandemic. It's not going to be the first priority. A lot of people have fun restaurants. They do it because they love food. Maybe they met someone like JJ and said, "Hey, I want to give you a shot, and I'll fund you." And that's how I got my first break. And that's not going to happen right away. People are going to take care of other priorities before they do that. So I think we're looking at a good 5 years before we're back to normal. Keep in mind, it's great news that we may have a vaccine. It's going to take until the summer to get to everyone inoculated. And so we have a long way to go. It's going to be a tough winter for so many people.
And I guess, just going off of that, what happens if the government doesn't fund that?
The question isn't if, the question is when. We need it to happen now, because if we wait till Joe Biden is inaugurated and hopefully there's a negotiation and Congress passes something, that's too long. If we wait 2 months, we're going to see, another, I don't know how many thousands of restaurants close their doors. Everyone is hanging on right now. And again, with indoor dining pretty much gone because it's getting cold and additional restrictions. I mean, Chicago just closed restaurants for indoor dining. LA never opened up. New York, there's additional restrictions. I'm pretty sure that very soon we're going to get all indoor dining will be closed in New York. I mean, again, if I had to make a decision between closing restaurants and keeping schools open, I think it's a pretty easy decision. And that's what we're going to say.
Yeah, it could be pretty grim. And then I was noticing, I was walking around New York City the other night, and I was noticing all these structures being built. And I assume it's happening in other parts of the country also for outdoor dining. But these structures frighten me a little bit because I understand as a former restaurateur that, you do what you have to do. But it frightened me because they were basically enclosures that they were building outdoors. And I didn't know what to think. I'm asking you two what you think, and Danny what you think about this, because I was a little surprised.
Yeah, I didn't do it. I haven't opened up any inside dining in a Field Trip at all. I wanted to keep my staff safe. We also use the back area to plate up to feed people. I didn't do any outside dining in the Harlem location because we are the only restaurant on that street, and I think about my neighbors, and I didn't want to disrupt people in a negative way. In that way, I do get nervous when I see inside structures outside with windows closed and doors. We are not protecting people just inside dining it on the street now. So we need to have airflow, right? These are the things the CDC says, and we watch it on the news all the time. But I get it. People are trying to figure out how to survive. It's really hard right now. So you do what you have to do. But I think just be careful on what you do building those outside structures. I'm thinking like if there's a big snowstorm in New York City, what happens to these places? It's just so much. At the new location of Field Trip in Long Island City, we're in a small food hall, and there's a lot of social distancing. There's a lot of air purifiers, but still the majority of people that come in and out in there are doing takeout or getting delivery. People are nervous, and I don't blame them. It is scary times, and I feel like I know what it's like to get COVID because of all the COVID cases that my wife have explained to me, 30-year-olds, 9-year-olds, like all these crazy stuff. So I feel like I know what it's like to get COVID. So I'm very cautious when it comes to it. And I think people should be thinking about that with their outside structures, and hopefully Tom and the team and we as the people can push our our Congress to pass this bill sooner than later.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the other question that because of the topic that we're in is about pivoting. Have you seen anything that's really been so impressive or so interesting around the country that others can learn from? I get that this is within the structure of understanding that we need that bill passed, but has there been anything that's been impressive?
That, and I think this will probably stick. Everyone's looking for revenue streams, however they'll find them. Takeout, something that Kraft would never consider doing takeout. We'll do takeout now. That'll probably stick. We're seeing a lot of people actually. Some chefs are able to tap into this, doing online cooking classes that are paid gigs. And then actually, if you're doing the class, the restaurant then is actually sending the ingredients to whoever's taking the class. And so that's another business model or a revenue stream. But I think right now, chefs are resourceful and they're looking for any way they can possibly do something. The one thing that I will point out though is and I think this is a topic for later on. I think I saw this. The third-party distributors are not helping us. Keep in mind when Seamless started, right? They were offering a service to companies because they would go to a Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs and say, we want to deliver food to you from the outside, and we'll do all the back office stuff. So you don't have to fill out expense reports. We'll make this seamless for you, okay? But when they pivoted their model and started delivering to individuals, that service isn't provided to the individuals. They don't care about that, and yet we're being forced to subsidize their business model. And so, quite frankly, I believe that if someone's ordering at home, they'll pay the luxury of staying in their house and getting great food delivered to them. And so I just think that business model does not work for restaurants at all. And yet we're sold that we got to actually, well, it's just incremental revenue. If it's at 30%, we're losing money every single time we actually sell that product. And so it's not great incremental revenue. And that's something that needs to be addressed. I think that's something that you're talking about in one of the future conversations. But again, anything that we can do, I think is going to stick. There's a lot of people offering, experiences to go, whether it's full Thanksgiving that's being picked up, classes along. Again, you pick up the food and then you can actually zoom in and someone will walk you through how to actually prepare that. Kind of like a mini Blue Apron, but with someone actually, the chef from that restaurant walking you through it. That's pretty cool. I think that's going to stick. And I think some of these models are, listen, we're gonna make this work some way or another. We'll get through this, but I think all these, again, these ancillary businesses that maybe we don't want to put our energy and resources into, we're finding that they're probably going to help because again, if it's just incremental revenue, if it's another, $20,000 a month, $10,000 a month, that's something that we hadn't had before, and I think that's all going to stick. And we're a resourceful group, chefs by nature. We have to be.
Absolutely. So innovative for sure. There was a really important question from the audience about have you had to change your menus or types of food that you serve due to the pandemic? Are you seeing a change in customer preferences?
I mean, for me, we're a fast casual restaurant, so we were kind of built for a pandemic. Price point, what goes in the bag. We never change any of our food. We lead with safety. That's our marketing technique. So tamper tape, staples, making sure silverware is wrapped. Those cheap little hand sanitizer things that we used to get in the deli, right? Going back to some of this foundation of food that I was taught at a very early part of my career. I remember the 2008 crisis. I was working at a restaurant, Jane, and I remember they own the Smith Now, that group. And I remember them coming in, Glenn Harris, Jeff Lefcourt coming into me. I was a sous chef saying, hey, you're gonna have to work X amount of hours. You're gonna have to do this, and this now if you want to keep your job, because we're down 50%. And I remember fighting it through and gritting it through with them. So as an owner, that's what clicked in for me at Field Trip when we were through the pandemic. And then going to what Tom was saying about delivery real quick, and I know that's later on, but he's right. The delivery companies are taking not money just from us, but also from the customer. If you look at Seamless and you look at your itemized receipt, they might have reduced the intake from a restaurant by 15%, but they put that on the customer now. So you'll see this like additional fee charge. And if you do the math, that's the 15% that they were putting on to the restaurant. So typically you would spend, what at Field Trip, $13, $11 for a bowl. By the time it comes to you from Seamless, it's at $21, $22 for that same product. So there has to be some type of balance because I know Seamless is about 50% of my delivery, even if I'm trying to push people to our own in-house delivery. And then just on revenue streams, I think on the high end, who I've seen who's done a really amazing job has been Coat. They have these 3 tiers. You know, dine-in is one revenue stream. You can get their meat box from Gold Belly or in-house as another revenue stream. And then they've opened up a wine shop now for delivery, or you can come in and get that also. So they've been able to show these 3 type of revenue streams for a restaurant, which I think is really good. And the one thing at Field Trip where we've done really well is we also work with the local food banks next to us. We know that they don't have enough capability of putting out enough food. So we work with Food Bank of New York City, helping them with meals. We've worked with another food bank on the east side. And, you know, we supplemented. Hey, maybe you only can give us $2 a meal for it. No problem. This is what it might look like. This is what we can do. We can drop it off. So we've really have tapped in or looked around on who needs help and how can a restaurant help out. And I believe restaurants and food banks should be working together more and more.
Yeah. So in all of my years of working as a chef, going close to 40 years now, I've been through a lot of ups and downs. The trend that I see is usually after a down cycle, there's a need for comfort food. People want to see those sticky braises. They want, you know, richer dishes. They don't want to see, you know, fussy food. I always called it the bistrosity of you know, restaurants. Everything became a bistro. You remember back to earlier recessions. They're coming out of it was bistro, bistro, bistro. We want burgers. We want comfort food. We want stews. We want, you know, rich hearty soups. And you know, people are gonna, you know, again, I think once we get through this pandemic and people feel it's really safe and we have a vaccine, I think restaurants are going to be busy because I think people are tired of being cooped up. There's fatigue here. I know I'm cooking at home every night. I'm tired of eating my own food. You know, I'm desperate for some good Thai food.
I wouldn't be tired of it.
We'll come over, Tom.
Fake it, but that's about it. And so, but you know, it's like we're all desperate. And the other thing we're all desperate for is that connection. You know, right. I mean, so much about food isn't really the food that you're eating. It's about bringing people around the table. And you know, I think JJ got that, and that's why his community is rallying around him. He did an amazing job of bringing those people and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a big hug with my food. Even though we all want to hug each other right now, we can't do that. And so how do you give those hugs? How do you give that comfort with your food and your service and your hospitality? And that's what everyone has waiting for them once we get through this pandemic. You're going to go to your local restaurant, the place that you love, and you're going to celebrate those birthdays again and those anniversaries again and all the celebrations and even sad moments, but you're going to come together and you're going to get the hug. And that's what we all need right now.
Absolutely. And that's such a great point. We celebrate at restaurants, we mourn at restaurants, we do all of these things, and you do provide comfort, and that's such a necessity. And, you know, whenever I've been getting takeaway or, you know, talking to the local restaurants in my area, I've thanked them. I'm like, thank you for staying open. Thank you for doing this. I miss you. You know, we can't wait to come back. And I think that's something we should all be thinking about, really thanking these local restaurateurs who are doing their best to keep things going. We have one more question from the audience, and did COVID change how restaurants view local ingredients? What about perspectives on authenticity? Great question. JJ, you want to take it first?
I mean, local ingredients are key. I mean, our foundation of our country is based on agriculture. And we have seen our agriculture system get rocked, right? And through the pandemic, when I started to feed people produce boxes at NYCHA, the local low income houses across the street from us, I went to my produce company and said, I want boxes from from Hudson Valley, New Jersey, Satter Farms. I want people that are close by that I know that I can potentially put some money in their pocket. And local ingredients are key. So all the wok vegetables on the field trip and the field trip bowls right now are all coming from New York State. Collard greens, butternut squash or sweet potatoes, Brussels sprouts, all coming from New York State to really try to support our local farms. But I think we all need to look at our agriculture system really deep right now on where we are buying ingredients from, because a lot of things aren't around or as plentiful or beautiful as we know them to be. I've seen the farmer market on 110th Street right here on Manhattan Avenue grow, which has been a really great thing for Harlem. And people are going out there and supporting a lot of those local farmers. They're the same people that are at Union Square Market that haven't come uptown in a long time. And I think now they've realized there's abundance of people that want their food. And when it comes to authenticity, I think right now it's just like, if you're just able to cook in your restaurant, that's authentic enough. And if you can just cook delicious food and people are coming in to buy it, who cares where it comes from? If it doesn't taste like somebody's grandma's cooking, as long as the chef and the restaurant are able to turn their lights on, employ people, cook some food, people come in and buy it. That's really what it's all about for us right now, because it is hard times on all restaurants across the country.
Yeah, I'm going to have a little different spin on that. I agree with everything JJ said. Restaurants have always done this, especially certain restaurateurs and chefs for 30 plus years been focused on local. The consumer needs to start looking at local. If you look at what's happened because of COVID, the meat industry was ravaged, and who bore the brunt of it? The workers that are making $7.25 an hour in some of these places like North Dakota, South Dakota, and all through the South. Farmers with no protection at all are out there picking for little money, completely getting just decimated because of COVID. And so we have a food system that is really fractured. A great read, Tom Philpott wrote a book called Perilous Bounty, where he talks about how we need to start moving away from the Central Valley in California, where the majority of our fruits and vegetables and nuts come from, and maybe some of the places in the Midwest where they're only growing corn and soy for meat production, and spread that out so our food system becomes much more resilient. But what that will do is eaters, people who are eating at home, who are consuming a lot more food than you're consuming in restaurants, need to start looking at purchasing locally as much as possible. The other thing that when you support local food systems, you're actually getting food directly to farmers. The great thing about that is it's not going through a middleman. They're realizing that their work, plus there's a multiplier effect of $1.75. For every dollar you give a farmer, there's a multiplier effect of $1.75 because they're spending money in their communities. They're buying equipment, they're buying materials, they're employing people. And so this just creates a food system that will actually take care of more people. Right now, the only people that are making money in our large food system is the big agribusinesses. The companies that are selling the seed and the fertilizer. The farmers aren't making it. The big agribusinesses are. We think of farmers. We think of small families. That's not happening anymore. And so I think that more consumers need to start voting with their fork and actually supporting those small local food systems.
Fantastic. JJ, you've been such a leader in your community, bringing so many people together. And just like Tom, I want to congratulate you. I'm one of your biggest fans. I've known Tom for a long time, and he knows how much I love him. But it's such an honor to finally meet you and have you as part of this conversation. What are your hopes post-COVID in terms of keeping that community spirit going?
Ooh, there's a lot. I'm a hopeful guy. If you know me, I try to pour as much hope into the world as I can. I hope I have so much. I can go on this forever, but I really hope that people take the restaurant industry really serious, and that is not, again, it's not looked at as a luxury. It's looked at as a necessity. and that it employs a lot of people, kind of what Tom was saying, not just the people in behind the doors or in the kitchen or serving the food. Touches a lot more than that. It keeps our streets clean, crime rates down. It's a lot to restaurants and what they do. But I hope we can change some of the system in the restaurant industry. Some of the things that we talk about behind the scenes that hurt us, or why we live with the profit margin being so low. And I think that's going to be the next step for us in the restaurant industry as we get this bill passed. But I'm hopeful we'll come back really strong. We'll be more delicious than ever. People will be celebrating the best moments of their lives. And I think small communities like Harlem, Staten Island, Queens, the Bronx, Brooklyn, of some places, these communities, the food scene will actually change in a lot of those places because restaurateurs will want to come there and open up their restaurants to people that the working class in New York City that live in those communities or in other places that look like those communities in the country.
Well, thank you both for those amazing insights and thoughts, and we appreciate it. And I think that the people listening also have a different perspective about food systems, about how to pivot and where we're going. And that bill, thank you, Tom, for mentioning that and putting that through. We're on to our next panel.
Thank you both. Bye.
So we're welcoming today, this is the last and final panel, what's next for restaurants post-COVID? And we have Andrew Rigie, the Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, and Salil Metah, chef and owner of Laut Singapore restaurant. And welcome both of you, and thank you so much for joining today. And Andrew, why don't you kick off and just give us a little background briefly of what you do and so forth.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Andrew Rigie. I am the Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. We are a not-for-profit trade association that represents restaurants, bars, nightclubs in 5 boroughs. So we do a lot of advocacy on behalf of the industry at all levels of government, offer a lot of training, services, everything from labor law compliance to food service compliance to, how technology is reshaping the hospitality industry. And we also do some fun different types of events as well. But when COVID hit, it's obviously shooken up our industry and created such a dire situation. So we've truly been working around the clock, fighting every single way we possibly can to support these small business owners and give them a fighting chance of survival. And happy to be here. Thanks for having me and looking forward to the conversation.
And Salil? You're on mute, Salil, still.
Oh, sorry. Hi, how are you doing? This is Metah. I'm a chef and owner at Laut and Laut Singapore. Still love New York City, still trying to make it happen, and hopefully something positive will come out of panels like these.
Great. So I want to get right into some questions. So we're talking about post-COVID-19. I know it's hard to talk about that considering what's going on right now. Considering the governor is adding more restrictions to New York City, other areas around the country are looking at closing indoor dining completely. But Manhattan was hit particularly hard. How are restaurants that are on life support right now? How do you see getting through this and getting to a post-COVID-19 restaurant that you can envision? Salil, I'll start with you. How are you surviving? And you have 3 restaurants. How are you surviving? How are you paying rent? And what's your plan after COVID?
So the only way to survive, in my opinion, is teamwork at every level. I think that, as somebody who's been around for the last 11 years, we've built certain relationships with our landlords, with our vendors, with our team, with our employees. And I think that it has to be all hands on deck and everybody has to compromise with each other at this moment. Gone are the days when restaurants were able to stay current. We're a cash flow based business. All our vendors are suffering as well. We're looking at it from a restaurant perspective, but what about the guys who supply us the wine, the beer, the liquor, the food, the produce? All these guys are being hurt because we work on a credit system, and they were probably not paid for months prior, and the bills are like continuously piling up. It could be a linen bill, it could be anything for, depending on what kind of access to cash that you may have. And I think that we have to get through this together. Without each other's help, it's not going to be possible on every level. So the landlord has to help the tenant, the vendors have to help us help them. And payment plans and everything are great, but it doesn't really solve the issue for us. There has to be some sort of federal intervention in order to keep everybody surviving and alive. And without some sort of federal intervention, it's just not it's gonna be really bad for a lot of amazing restaurants. A lot of neighborhoods, depending on what neighborhood you're in or what side of the block you're located in, really makes a difference in what kind of numbers you'll do during this time. So if you're a corner restaurant, you can take two sides of open streets. But if you're stuck in between two restaurants and you're used to having like 70 seats indoors and you can only seat like 12 seats outdoors, so what sort of revenue does that generate for us?
Andrew, you want to say something? Sorry.
No, I would just add, I think all those points are spot on. I think Manhattan in particular, specifically if you look at more commercial districts where restaurants rely on office workers that are not coming back anytime soon. I think the recent estimates are less than 10% of office space is occupied right now. With these new restrictions coming in, that will probably drop again. And who knows when the nearly 70 million annual tourists are going to come back to the city of New York. So I think that plays a big factor into it. In addition to neighborhoods, I think your demographic of your consumer. If you have a younger population, they may be a little bit more risk tolerant to go out. If you cater to, an older population or a population with younger children, you may not do as well. And then there's all these other factors about the outdoor space and so forth that make it really difficult to judge when we will come back. But I think long term for a lot of these businesses in these areas, it's going to come down to what kind of support, particularly the federal government, is going to be able to provide. These restaurants are not shut down because you don't like their burger or bad service or, you didn't like their pasta. They've been mandated by government to either shut down or limit their operations. Now we need that same exact government to provide the support to them so they can reopen. Because what is Manhattan or what is New York City or what is America without the diversity of our restaurants? We really are that social adhesion and that fabric that's so important to the greater economic ecosystem, so to speak.
So well said, Andrew. I want to go back to something you said earlier about how technology could reshape the industry. And on our last panel, Chef JJ Johnson talked about, better airflow and the need for infrastructure in restaurants. And that, this is probably not the last health crisis that the restaurant industry or society as a whole will face. This is probably the first of many challenges and global shocks that we'll face. What kinds of technology do you think will help restaurateurs in the future post-COVID really prevent, having to shut down in the way that they have recently?
Yeah, I'm of the thought that, people have a very short memory. Once there's a vaccine and this is in the, in the rear view window, I question how much of the wisdom, so to speak, that we've learned during this pandemic will apply to future behavior. I would not be surprised, unfortunately, if a lot of the things that we should have learned during this pandemic are kind of just lost with, oh my goodness, we're back to some sense of normal, we can go out. I think when it comes to technology, there have been companies trying to sell their platforms for years. And one reason or another, they never caught on. Look at QR codes. Before the pandemic, people were like, QR codes, that's like the oldest technology. Who cares about it? Now it's everywhere. I think you see the same with mobile payments. It's kind of pushed us to catch up with Europe, where it's basically everywhere, table side payment and everything. So I think things like that are going to accelerate the adoption. People won't just stop using them. This isn't technology related, but someone who's building out a restaurant, which is crazy, what timing, said they had a lot of banquettes, but all of their banquettes now are movable. Because if they get hit with another pandemic, having fixed banquettes is really not good for creating a dining room where you can socially distance. So that was an interesting restructuring of the way a restaurant's being built out. But I think data, which was important pre-pandemic, the way people look at it, understanding how important it is to own it, and if the data is just being collected and owned by a third-party company like a Grubhub or a Seamless, where you don't have access to it, you become, in fact, at the whim of that company because you can't lose them without losing their customers. So I'm hoping people will see the importance of owning consumer data and using it in a way that benefits your business directly versus some third-party company that has billions of dollars in funding behind them.
Salil, I wonder what you think about that. I've heard from other restaurateurs that they're sort of always in the back of their mind that they'll be preparing for the next sort of, disaster to happen post-COVID. Do you think, will that always be in the back of your mind?
The first thing on my mind right now is to get through this disaster. The next one is inevitable. Sure, it's going to happen, but, we're going to learn from this experience. I think that some certain positives come out of negatives as well. We've learned how to be more efficient with less of a staff. We've understood how to eliminate like certain options from a menu and, be more concentrated. With the technology aspect behind it, it kind of helps you, like with the QR codes. I think it's going to be great, and it's going to be something amazing because now you can introduce or 86 something out of your menu at an instant, and you don't have to go about going to the printer, redesigning it. And I think, if we can incorporate other things like platforms like TikTok or, Instagram and these other things and kind of like make it easier for people to share information about where they're dining or their support of that certain restaurant, I think that would be like pretty cool and amazing if we can just start like a virtual campaign of customers like their favorite restaurant and just post it, like kind of like a TikTok challenge. And, I think that we can incorporate it in ways where, it can be an absolutely amazing thing because, food moves technology at this moment, and there are certain technologies that are catering to food finally, and this can be something that can really empower a restaurateur to focus on a niche market or like a certain consumer that you might want to reach that you couldn't in the past, and this could be instant as opposed to, overpaying marketing agencies or, PR firms or something like that, because it's going to be a thing of the past, I assume.
So I just wanted to, were you about to say something, Danny, or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to go back slightly. And I had this vision, people celebrating in the streets, not literally, but theoretically, everybody kind of this whole new spring in the air, not in spring, but in a spring in the air, when COVID starts to recede and there's a vaccination. And, having been a restaurateur and knowing how the bills pile up, and we discussed this, we touched on it tangentially, there are restaurants that are going to owe, close in New York City and specifically in Manhattan, close to $1 million in back rent. And landlords, it's easy to make them the enemy, but they have property taxes, which are often sometimes, 50 or 40% of the, of their rent that's coming in. Sometimes it's 30%, it varies. And then there's also mortgages, loans that these people bought to buy these buildings. So it's not like they could just forgive rent that they expected. There are some landlords, co-ops and condos that have that flexibility, but not every landlord does. So how does this, and I know we're waiting for some federal bailout, but how does this work? How does this all work? Let's say there isn't a bailout, okay? Or let's say the bailout's not as much. How are these restaurants, when everybody's celebrating, going to then, continue and grow and make up for all this lost income?
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest question that I've been grappling with. Rent is a restaurant's largest fixed cost. You're paying it whether you're fully open, shut, or your operations are limited like they are currently. We've been conducting at the New York City Hospitality Alliance basically a monthly report about what restaurants are paying in rent. Our October one was more than 400 restaurants in the 5 boroughs, found that 88% of them either paid no rent or only partial rent in the month of October. And month after month, that percentage has continued to grow. Only 1 out of 10 of them have renegotiated their lease. And as you put it, Charles, landlords are not all the big wealthy landlords. There's a lot of mom and pop landlords. They have mortgages. The property taxes in a lot of these leases, which are triple net, are passed on through to the business. And that poses a huge challenge because, as you've seen, the state and city budgets just drop and they're in dire fiscal shape. How are we going to fund our essential services? And you need your essential services, everything from public safety to the garbage cans being changed on a daily basis to keep New York City safe and clean, and all these other things that eventually kind of allow restaurants and other places to succeed. So I think if we do not deal with this issue soon, it's only going to exacerbate the crisis. People always ask me, well, how many restaurants have closed? I don't know, probably in the thousands. It's too early to tell exactly. More importantly, I think restaurants are being kept open artificially because the state has a moratorium on evictions. The city passed an important law that suspends the enforcement of personal liability guarantees and leases. And for those businesses that were fortunate enough to get the PPP, they had a little bit of cash around to play with, which they've now, for the most part, all exhausted. So I think if we do not get federal stimulus to address this rent crisis and make people as whole as possible, then what's going to happen is going to cause a lot of social unrest. And what I mean by that is at some point, bills have to be paid. And if they don't, there's going to be defaults throughout the system. The commercial tenants will default, and then the landlords will default. And then the banks are going to go to the federal government and ask for a bailout. The federal government is going to have to do the same thing they did last time, too big to fail, bail out the banks, and there's going to be a huge upheaval of social unrest because what did we do? We let all the small businesses, all the workers essentially get screwed, and now when the banks go to the federal government with their hand out, boom, we give them money. So I'm really hoping that the Restaurants Act and these other federal programs get passed fast. Otherwise, it's going to be a very difficult and long situation dealing with the real estate crisis.
Andrew, are you hopeful that with the new administration coming into place that there will be more attention paid to these issues, or will it be business as usual as it has been over the last 9 months?
No, I mean, I think the Democrats have made it very clear. The House passed the HEROES Act, which includes the Restaurants Act and the Save Our Stages Act, which help, restaurants and nightlife and music venues. There's bipartisan support in the Senate for it. Joe Biden, President-elect, has indicated his support for all of this. So I am hopeful, but I think we're going to have to see what happens with those 2 seats in Georgia. If the Democrats take the Senate, I think absolutely there will be the type of support that's needed. If they do not, I think it's going to be a tough road. I think something will get done, but sometimes doing too little, in some ways, I don't want to say it exacerbates the situation, but it certainly doesn't help it. So I think we need to go all in. I'm hopeful that with the Biden administration, they do something, but it's a long ways off because even if they get into office, they pass something. By the time the systems are set up, the money starts flowing. What are we in February or March? And now with indoor dining being further restricted, people talking about a total shutdown, cold weather, outdoor dining is not as relevant for most people. We're going to lose a lot more businesses and jobs before that time.
We just had question as, what can we do? What can we as citizen eaters really do to help?
Well, I think if you have family members or friends in particularly Republican-controlled U.S. Senate states, reach out to them, have them reach out to their U.S. senators, and demand that they pass these bills. I will tell you, I often go on different news shows, and one of the things, depending on the channel, I won't say which one, I get people contacting me from around the country, and they basically say, stop asking for the federal government to bail you out because your communist governor and your communist mayor and their failures to support businesses. And I think if we get people in these states to understand that it's not that this or that, there's a lot of nuance there, and they need to really support the nation as a whole. And they would hope that if they were in a crisis because of a tornado or something else, that the federal government would step in and help them in their need, regardless of what their political affiliations are. So I think Senate-controlled Republican seats, you got to get to them, tell them they need to support the Restaurants Act, more PPP. That's the most critically important thing people can do at this time.
So switching back to sort of the future, okay, is there any fear, and Salil, do you have, I'll ask you, is there a fear that people are getting into patterns of staying at home and staying in the suburbs, wherever second homes they might have? I know this sounds, but I know your customer base because I know you. Do you have a fear that you're post-COVID that you're not going to have the same levels of customers that you did have before, especially with workers maybe working 3 days a week in Manhattan instead of 5 days a week?
I mean, I'm not that afraid of customers not wanting to go out, because I feel like, as human beings, we're social butterflies, and we couldn't wait for, as soon as outdoor dining opened up, it was so successful for so many different restaurants that people were tired of like staying at home. And I think the dining industry is something so important to our social circle as well, because a lot of times dining experiences are based on who you're dining with as opposed to where you're dining at. And yes, there's going to be a significant drop, I assume. We're located right next to Silicon Alley, and they've declared that they're not coming back for the next year and a half. And if I get comfortable as a company and I can see that I'm as efficient working from home, why would I spend that extra dollars to be in Manhattan somewhere, to have this pretend to believe office when I can have a conversation with you over a platform like this? So I don't see them coming back, to be honest with you. I think that rent situations will be a big challenge for landlords too, like for them to be able to rent out a space in a neighborhood that was pre-COVID, like one of the best, hottest neighborhoods, like Midtown. You walk past Midtown today, there's not a soul there after 7 p.m. And Midtown was one of the best locations you could be in. The same thing with Soho, with us at Union Square. It's like, we were paying top dollar per square footage, and this is, so you'll see the rents drop tremendously. The market's going to change again. I'm not afraid of the weekends because, being in the neighborhood that we're in, like a lot of people from different boroughs come in to dine in Manhattan, but that lunch, which we used to be like 30-40% of our revenue, is gone. That catering business is gone for those businesses. So yeah, we have to definitely, and what's going to be the saddest part about this is going to be that, with the PPP restrictions and everything, like, there's what's not being spoken enough about is the undocumented workers who were the heroes of this pandemic. And, a lot of times, like, as a documented worker, you were getting paid more for being home to help stop the curve of this virus. But these undocumented workers got nothing. And they're the ones who came back to work while everybody else was sitting at home. And they're the ones who help provide you a safe meal at your home. And they haven't been compensated at all. And they are the reason why restaurants, make a profit, or they're the reasons why we're able to provide you the certain prices that we do. It's just a fact of the industry, and I feel like something. Yes, we need to help everybody, but I think that the undocumented workers have to have a voice, and they have to be helped somehow.
Such a great point. And I hope that post-COVID, everything that's been made visible during COVID, including the role that undocumented workers and so many others have played, well, they'll get the respect and the support and the encouragement that they need and the help to become, citizens of the United States, because they deserve it. So thank you for bringing that up. It's such an important point.
No, for sure. Right? They don't get to serve,
So we have just a few minutes left, or not even, and I just wanted to get out one thing quickly. I know this sounds weird, but Salil, could you give us not to put you on the spot, we discussed this before. Can you just tell people, for instance, what you're paying for one location in rent per month, just to give people a flavor for that?
So on 17th Street, it's $40,000 a month, not including your utilities. So not including your taxes, not including your water, your electric, not including your all in all, our fixed expenses are about $100.
Right.
Per location, which is it's a fixed cost. And the more that continues, the more it up, and eventually it's going to catch up to everybody. So that the acts are extremely important to get past in order for us to be able to continue what we do.
So just in closing, what are you looking forward to when, as COVID-19 recedes and things, I guess it'll be a new normal. It won't be what we consider normal now. Both you and Andrew, could you just give us your final thoughts on what you envision?
Sure. I mean, for me, I just envision people coming back to the restaurant, giving my regular customers a big hug, a big thank you, physical contact, being able to talk to a stranger without a mask on. And, I think that, we've gone through many different crises in New York City, and New York City has always found a way to bounce back. We're resilient and we're amazing people. And we come together at the time of crisis. We may not agree with each other. We may call each other names that we don't mean, but in the end, we're very supportive. And, I look at this in a way where hopefully New Yorkers can come together for each other, with each other. Please continue to support any local business that you can, not just restaurants. Any small mom and pop owned business is needed. They need you. The big guys have cash reserves, and they can withstand the storm, but the little guys really need each and every person at this time. Whether it's a coffee or whether it's a pack of gum, penny and penny make many.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming together, especially with your incredibly busy schedules. And thank you so much for a fascinating talk and discussion. And please make sure you check out foodtank.com and NewYorkCityFoodPolicy.org. And thank you to Food Tank, Danny and Bernie. And thank you to Alexina, the Deputy Director of the Hunter College New York City Food Policy Center. And Food Tank, your wonderful partners. And we love working with you. And thanks to all of our guests and viewers. We appreciate everything.
Thanks so much, Charles.
Thank you, guys.